Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud, while stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 2 of Little Blue Book number 51, titled Giordano Bruno, His Life and Martyrdom, written by Coulson Turnbull. And we will begin with chapter 2, as soon as I find it. Okay. There we are. Chapter 2, The Exile and the Wanderer. But yet for some in vain the call is heard, heedless and unprepared they mind it not. Giordano Bruno. So he turned his back on Italy, which had so mistrusted him. He crossed the Alps on foot and arrived in Geneva. Here he met an entire colony of Italian fugitives, adherents to the Reformed doctrine led by the Marchese Galcasio Caracolia. Now let's try that again. This whole cover is just falling apart. Led by the Marchese Galcasio Caracciolo. It was a nephew of Paul IV. The Marchese received the persecuted one in a not unfriendly manner. He, however, obliged him to exchange the habit of the Dominicans for a more worldly dress, and Bruno never again wore the habit of his order. How long he sojourned in Geneva seems uncertain. He supported himself by printing and correcting proof sheets. From time to time, he attended the service of his reformed countrymen, but his independent spirit rebelled against the blind, compulsory, and exacting faith. He had some controversy with Antonin de la Fay, a member of the Academy. This gentleman had given a lecture, and Bruno, in a pamphlet, corrected it. Said 20 errors made in this lecture. Both Bruno and the printer were arrested, and our philosopher only gained his liberty by recalling the contents of his pamphlet. It was made known to him that he must adopt Calvinism or leave Geneva. Soon after, he left the city so intolerant, in which 26 years before Savert had mounted the stake. Next, he turned to France, and reaching Lyon, which was a city of refuge against the religious persecutions, he tried to get work, but failed, so went on to Toulouse. Soon after, he started private lectures on the sphere, or on astronomy, and received here the degree of doctor, competed for the chair of philosophy, which, according to his own statement, he kept for 2 years. His lectures were many and varied. He had to give up his chair owing to the civil war under Henry of Navarre. But not before he had seized and used his opportunity to introduce and discuss the deepest questions. What is the origin and destiny of humanity? What of the soul? Is it matter or spirit? Potential or real? Individual or universal? Mortal or immortal? Is man gifted with a soul? Or are all beings equally so? Great questions, indeed, were these in that dark day. Bruno seems to have given great thought to these questions. He taught that everything has a soul. One great universal mind penetrates all and moves all things. Nothing is lost, but all nature is in a state of transmutation, in the act of becoming. He taught the movements of the earth, and the force, clarity, and novelty of his opinions roused up the lethargic clergy, and so he retired, going to Paris, which he reached in 1587. In the 2 years in Toulouse, he published De Anemia and De Clavis Magis, both of which were lost. In Paris, he tried to make use of his rights as a graduate doctor and at once announced special lectures, choosing very scholarly subjects for which he received great applause. He was greatly admired for his eloquence and his remarkable memory. He was offered a professorship, but had to refuse it. As an excommunicant, it was impossible for him to fulfill certain duties which this place required of him, namely, to attend Mass. But the reputation of his marvelous gifts had reached the ear of King Henry III, before whom he was summoned to appear. Henry was inclined to superstition, and he tried to find out if Bruno's power of memory was a natural thing or something magical. Bruno suspected the king and succeeded in showing him that the powers of his memory were natural and not uncanny. Better to convince the king, he dedicated a pamphlet to his majesty entitled The Shadow of Ideas, a dissertation of the Lulitic art, which was his principal means in acquiring memory and sustained eloquence. This rare faculty enabled him to write the richest representations of pictures, the most distant to his present thought. The Shadow of Ideas, however, contained more than writings on the Lulitic art. It is he in it he outlined his philosophy, and in style it resembled much Plato's cave in the Republic. In light and shade, or in parable and idea, there was an interchange showing the relationship of ideas to things, and things to their creative foundation. Bruno strongly emphasized the unity of the universe, also the principle of unfoldment or development, how nature brings forth the all from the all, and gradually changes the lower to the higher, and that the mind has power to recognize the all from the all. Yet the mind of man comprehends the truth only in a picture, therefore the expression, the shadow of ideas. In Paris, Bruno gave still further evidence of the versatility of his talents. He published Il Candilio, a comedy. At Sorbonne, philosophical questions were discussed with much freedom, showing he was not exclusive either in philosophy or religion. He favored neither the Huguenot nor the Catholic faction. For this reason did he obtain the faculty of lecturing at Sorbonne. He must not gather from this that Bruno was indifferent to religion. He aimed for higher and nobler things. He professed a more pure and complete faith, to wit, the love of humanity and of wisdom. Bruno, as we now know, was not a man to conceal his ideas, which he launched out with great fervor. The sudden conversion of the king, coupled with the free speaking of Bruno, compelled him to leave Paris. Equipped with a letter of introduction from the king to his ambassador in London, Michel de Castelnau de Manviceri, well, that's a mouthful, Bruno came over to England, not merely to become acquainted with the land and the people, but to impart the doctrines of the Copernican system and win them over to broader thinking. From Bruno's writings, we find him in Oxford, where he introduced himself in an independent manner by issuing a pamphlet on the 30 Seals. He lectured on the Pythagorean symbolism, on the immortality of the soul, and on the new system of Copernicus. He naturally made enemies of the Oxford profession, especially in his unheard of insistence of the numberless sun systems in an infinite universe. The oppositions to his teachings were loud. Oops. Come on, turn the page. Were loud, just like that car going by. Incredibly loud. Were loud and stormy. In a public debate given in honor of the presence of a Polish prince, Johann Alesko, in Oxford, June of 1583, He defended his new cosmological doctrine against a few doctors of theology. He ascribed to himself the victory in this debate, but the real outcome of the same resulted in the restriction against continuing his lecture. He repeatedly appeared alone at court. Elizabeth was very fond of showing her knowledge of Italian, and was greatly pleased with his conversation. Bruno, on his part, eulogized the queen in the flowery style of the time, naming her as the great Amphitrite. He approached very near, while visiting the court, the brilliant statesman Sir Philip Sidney. To this noble soldier and poet Bruno dedicated Lo Spazio della Bestia Triunfante. In London, he made public a new book entitled Ash Wednesday, in which he attacked the Oxford pedants, P-E-D-A-N-T-S, pedants, from a London mob. Yet, withal, the few years he passed in England were the most productive and happiest time of his life. All his Italian writings which were saved were edited and published in England. Bruno was one of the first of the philosophers of the newer age who, like the ancients, treated scientific questions in a living language. In his dialogues, he aimed to give a popular presentation in a fluent conversational style, after the style of Plato. His style is varied, his means of expression facile, interchanging with earnest and whimsical wit, and again with instructive explanations, vivid descriptions, satire, or bitter reproof. There was no expression, whether sensational or placid, of which he was not master. In the Oxford Lectures, when only 36, we find him anticipating the doctrines of Goethe and Darwin. Speaking of the soul, he taught that nothing in the universe is lost. Everything is in a state of transformation. Therefore, body and soul, spirit and matter are equally eternal. The body may dissolve, but becomes transformed. The soul transmigrates, and, drawing around itself atom to atom, it reconstructs for itself a new body. The spirit which animates and moves all things is one. Everything differentiates according to the different forms and bodies in which it operates. Some animate things are inferior by reason of the meanness of the body in which they operate. Others are superior through the richness of the same. In his teachings, we see the idea later in Darwin of the transformation of species and of the organic unity of the animal world, and the alternation from segregation to aggregation, which we know as death and life, is no other than change of form. Turning the page. Oh, that is the end of chapter 2. So let's see, should we go on to chapter 3? How many pages do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we'll go on to chapter 3. All right, the title of chapter 3 is Visits the German Universities. And let me take some hydration. Hydrate, Maddie. All right, on to chapter 3. This cover is just falling to pieces. Alrighty. Chapter 3. Pardon me. Visits the German universities. And a quote by Giordano Bruno. The divine light is always in man, presenting itself to the sense and to the comprehension, but man rejects it. Giordano Bruno. The recalling of the cultured French ambassador, Castelnau, naturally brought about Bruno's departure from England. He returned to Paris, but did not enter the university. Frequent tumults preceding the Civil War interrupted study, and Bruno had already determined to visit other universities, particularly those in Germany. Before he departed, he desired to make a further onslaught on the current doctrines of the philosophy of nature taught in Paris. In a thesis of 120 articles, which he handed to the directory of the university, he contradicted with pointed exactness the Aristotelian philosophy. In the expression of the sentences, he attained a precision which was scarcely even surpassed by Spinoza. Crowds of the admirers were awakened to the enthusiasm such as never had been witnessed since the days of Abelard. The printing of the theses was permitted, their debate granted, although many of them contradicted the Catholic doctrine. The debate took place during Pentecost, May 25th, 1588, not at Sorbonne, but in the College of Cambrai. In an inspired speech, Bruno, through the interpreter, Jean Henquin of Paris, declared the discovery of numberless worlds in the one infinite universe. Nothing was more deplorable, declared he, than the habit of blind belief, for of all other things it hinders the mind from recognizing such matters as are in themselves clear and open. It was proof of a base and low mind for one to wish to think with the masses or majority merely because the majority were the majority. Truth does not change because it is or is not believed by a majority of people. That's still true. However, he cautioned that they should not be influenced by the fervor of his speech, but by the weight of his argument and the majesty of truth. Immediately after his impressive discourse, Bruno started on his journey to Germany. In Marburg, he was denied permission to lecture. In Wittenberg, the German Athens, he found welcome. Here he found Albrecht Gentilius, the countryman, and one of the founders of the doctrine of people's rights. Other professors welcomed him and treated him as their colleague, receiving him in their homes, although, as he expressed himself, he was unknown to them, nor recommended, and not even examined in their faith, and was also an opponent to the philosophy to which they adhered. Only the Calvinistic party of the university remained unfriendly to him, and these, after the death of First August. It's a strange name, First. Hear the train whistle. Gaining precedency under his successor, Christian, he was obliged to yield after having held for nearly 2 years a position enabling him to discourse on philosophy and edit a number of pamphlets on mnemonics. In a farewell address to the Senate and the university, he eulogized the mental greatness of the Germans, who had only been known to him previously as a people of much drinking. Wow, nothing's changed much, has it? He prophesied that they would lead in science. Here, he said, is being prepared the soil for the transplanting of wisdom from the lands of Greece and Italy. May Jupiter grant that the Germans may recognize their strength and strive to aim for the highest, and they will be no longer men, but rather resemble gods. For divine and godlike is their genius. He also highly praised Luther. From Wittenberg, Bruno went to Prague, where he in vain sought for a position and support. He dedicated to Kaiser Rudolph II a pamphlet against the mathematicians and philosophers of the present age. In this he professed his religion of universal love of man, a doctrine above all controversies. This dedication only brought him a present from the emperor, and after staying several months, resolved to go to Helmstedt, where Duke Julius of Braunschweig had founded a new university. Bruno remained here 1 year. During this time, the Duke died, and the university, Academia Julia, honored the memory of its founder with a solemn requiem, in which Bruno took part with an oratio consolation. In this ortation, Bruno said it seemed not by mere chance, but by providence, he had been directed here after so many dangers and sorrows. Banished from his fatherland for the sake of truth, here he was received as a citizen and lived in freedom and safety, while in his own country he had been exposed to the hungry jaws of the Roman wolves. The hopes which he had expressed in these words were not to be fulfilled. This time it was the eager persecution of a Lutheran pastor which terminated his scarcely commenced activity. The superintendent of Helmstedt, Boethius, excommunicated him before the assembled community, and as the rector of the university, theologian Hoffman, would not or could not protect him. He was again obliged to look around for a new location. He chose Frankfurt on the Main, the Leipzig of that time, with the intention of finishing here his Latin works and having them printed. He at once communicated with the well-known publishers J. Wechsel and P. Fischer, but as the council of the city denied him the privilege of staying, they procured for him shelter in the cloister of the Carmelites of the outskirts of the city. Here he was incessantly at work, absorbed in his studies and his writing. All day long he could be found in his cell, either writing or meditating. In feverish haste he worked, and was only interrupted by a visit to Zurich to instruct several young men there. In Germany, particularly, he showed the same boldness and courage, always treated with scanty welcome. Nevertheless, crowds of the intelligent flocked to his lectures. He was, said the prior of the Carmelite cloister, a man of universal mind, skilled in all sciences, but he had not a trace of religion, possibly not a trace of the religion of the said Carmelite monk. A special mention should be made of his works which appeared in quick succession in Frankfurt, and which were dedicated to Heinrich Julius of Braunschweig, the threefold smallest, the monad number and figure, and the immeasurability of innumerable worlds. In the first mentioned writing, he teaches that the same power which develops itself into the infinity of the universe lives also in the smallest particle. It is one of the same in the greatest and the smallest. The universe could be destroyed if we could destroy the most infinitesimal part of it. Similar thoughts as these are found in the writings of Leibniz, even the expression of monad or monads, meaning the creative source of all things, has been used also by Bruno in his philosophy, but in a deeper sense. His work, treating on the seven liberal arts, was written at this time. The fair in Frankfurt was visited by a great many foreign publishers, particularly from Italy. On one such occasion, Bruno made the acquaintance of the Venetian booksellers, Bertano and Ciotto, and the latter brought his writings to Venice. There, in Ciotto's bookshop, the same fell into the hands of the young noble Giovanni Mocenigo, Mocenigo, who with great eagerness inquired as to the whereabouts of the author and desired to be instructed by him in the secret of memory and other things that he knew. Mocenigo was born of one of the noblest families of Venice. He was suspicious, bashful, and a man of indecisions, and he became the tool in the hands of his spiritual tutors. He was well informed of the secret workings of the Inquisition, and this poor, miserable weakling forced himself into Bruno's life, writing him again and again, full of fine professions of friendship, inviting him to Venice, promising him protection and care. It was Ciotto who forwarded the correspondence. On Bruno's return from Zurich, he resolved to accept the invitation. He was tired of his poverty, his wandering life, and he longed for his native country, the charm of which he knew so well how to describe in vivid colors. It was natural he should feel himself safe in one of the noblest families as a guest. Could he refuse such an offer, which at least for some time would save him from poverty and sorrow? He observed nothing of the invisible net his enemies had spread for him. Having no advising friends, absorbed in his work, the harmless man, in spite of his combativeness and courageous temperament, made a false step. The wisdom and cunning of life is withheld from those who would live 100 years or more. And that is the end of chapter 3. So, that is the end of part 2 of Little Blue Book, number 51, titled Giordano Bruno, His Life and Martyrdom, written by Coulson Turnbull. As you can see, the cover of the book is absolutely falling apart. So, thanks for listening, and join me in part 3.